It was a quiet night in Lubbock, Texas. The kind where the streets are empty, the world seems still, and most people are fast asleep. But at exactly 3 a.m., a desperate voice shattered the silence. "David, please stop, no, don't do this." The operator on the other end of the 911 line barely had time to react before the chilling sound of gunshots rang through the call. And then, silence. Police rushed to the address linked to the call, their sirens slicing through the stillness of the early morning. Officers knew they were responding to a potential domestic dispute, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to find. Inside the small, dimly lit house, the scene was horrifying. Blood stained the bedroom walls. On the bed lay 27-year-old Jennifer Cruz, her lifeless eyes staring at the ceiling. Across the room, near the bathroom, another body, Albert "Bo" Martinez. 2 people. Both shot. Both murdered in cold blood. But something wasn't right. There were clear signs of forced entry, broken glass, a damaged door, but the home had not been ransacked. No valuables were missing. Whoever did this wasn't looking for money. They weren't there to steal. They were there to kill. Then came the most chilling discovery of all: the home security system had been disabled from the inside. And the person who did it had to know the passcode. At that moment, detectives realized, they weren't looking for a stranger. They were looking for someone Jennifer knew. But who? And why? As officers examined the scene, one name stood out, the name heard over and over again in that terrifying 911 call. David. Why? Jennifer knew her killer. And she had said his name. Police worked quickly, tracking down a man named David Silo, Jennifer's ex-boyfriend. He was the father of her children, a man who had been a part of her life for over a decade. But they had been broken up for a year. What could have made him show up in the middle of the night? The next step was obvious. Police went to David's home. They needed answers. Little did they know, they were about to witness one of the worst attempts at deception in interrogation history. But what really happened that night? What could drive someone to commit such a brutal act? And most importantly, did David actually think he could get away with it? We'll uncover the shocking truth in the next part of this story. But first, what do you think? If you heard a name in a 911 call like this, would that be enough to convince you of someone's guilt? Or do you believe in waiting for more evidence? Let me know what you think. Stay with me, because this case is about to take a turn that no one saw coming. David Silo walked into the interrogation room like a man who believed he had everything under control. He wasn't in handcuffs. He wasn't being dragged in against his will. No, David was there voluntarily. And that was his first mistake. Detectives had spent hours piecing together what they already knew. Jennifer's final 911 call had been clear as day. She had called his name. She had begged for her life. And then, gunfire. But David? He had no idea they had that recording. As he sat down, one of the detectives greeted him casually. "David, we just want to ask you a few questions. You're not under arrest." David nodded, pretending to be calm. Yeah, no problem. What's this about?" The detective didn't answer right away. Instead, he started with small talk, questions about David's past, his job, his kids. It was a technique often used to gauge a suspect's body language, and David was already cracking. His fingers fidgeted. His breathing changed. But he kept playing the role of an innocent man. "So, David, when's the last time you talked to Jennifer?" For a split second, something flickered in David's eyes. He hesitated, then shrugged. I think Thursday." "Yeah, Thursday. We talked about the kids." The detective nodded. "You didn't see her after that?" "No, man. I've been at home. Work, kids, that's it. Lie number 1. Okay. What kind of phone do you have? It's at my house. A Samsung. The detective leaned forward. See, here's the thing, David. We went to Jennifer's house this morning. She was found dead. David blinked. Then, he did something no innocent man would do. No, that's not true. Not, oh my God. Not, what happened. Not even, who did this. No. His first reaction was denial. Detectives let that sit for a moment before continuing. That's why we're talking to you. You were close to her. We're just trying to figure out what happened. David took a deep breath, nodding. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what's going on, but I had nothing to do with it. Lie number 2. What David didn't know was that outside of that room, officers were already pulling his cell phone records, tracking his movements from the night before. And in just a few minutes, his alibi would fall apart completely. But even before that, detectives had something that would shake him to his core. Because right now, David thought he was playing the game. But what happens when you realize you've already lost? That moment was coming. And it would be devastating. But let me ask you, if you were in the room with David, listening to his answers, would you believe him? Would you feel like something was off? Stay with me, because in the next part, detectives reveal their trump card. And David? He won't be able to fake his way out of this one. The air inside the interrogation room was thick with tension. The detectives had been circling David for over an hour, letting him spin his web of lies. But now, it was time to tear it apart. One of the detectives leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. David, we've been working this case since 3 a.m. And here's something you need to know. David shifted in his chair. His hands, which had been resting on the table, clenched into fists. There was a 911 call. His breath hitched. Jennifer called the police while it was happening. She said your name. She begged you to stop. We have the recording. For the first time, David was speechless. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He knew he was caught. The detective let the silence hang in the air. We listened to the whole thing, David. You were there. You pulled the trigger. Now, I need you to tell me why. David's entire demeanor changed. The fake confidence drained from his face, leaving only panic. His mind raced. Could he still talk his way out of this? I didn't mean to. The detective cut him off. Don't lie to me now, David. You planned this. You knew the alarm code. You disabled it. You kicked in the back door. You had a gun. David buried his face in his hands. It got out of control. I just wanted to scare them. Scare them? You shot them in the head. Twice. David's breath became shallow. He was trapped, and he knew it. At that moment, another detective entered the room. He placed a file on the table and opened it, revealing photos of the crime scene. Look at them, David. David turned his head away. No. I can't. You did this. You owe them the truth. The room was silent except for David's ragged breathing. His shoulders trembled. I didn't want to hurt her. I couldn't take it anymore. Take what, David? That she moved on. That she was happy with someone else. David didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than words. This was never about self-defense. It was never about an argument getting out of hand. This was jealousy. This was rage. This was control. The detectives had what they needed. But there was one final question left. Where's the gun, David? He exhaled sharply, staring at the table. Then, in a barely audible voice, he whispered. By the old CVS. In the trees. David had finally confessed. But was he truly sorry? Or was he just defeated? What do you think? Do you believe David ever felt remorse for what he did? Or was this just another desperate attempt to save himself? In the next part, we'll take a closer look at what happened after the confession, and the chilling details that prove this was always premeditated. Stay tuned. David Sillo had finally confessed. The truth was out. He had broken into Jennifer's home. He had confronted her and Bo. He had pulled the trigger. And now, he was sitting in the interrogation room, drained of all his fake confidence. But here's the thing, his confession wasn't enough. The detectives needed hard evidence. Something undeniable. Something that would leave no room for doubt. And they had it. Moments after David revealed where he had hidden the gun, officers were already en route to the location. Just as he described, behind an abandoned CVS, tucked away in the trees, they found the murder weapon, a Glock .40 caliber pistol. The same type of gun used in the murders. The gun wasn't the only thing that sealed David's fate. Back at the crime scene, investigators had already recovered 2 spent shell casings, matching the bullets found in Jennifer and Bo's bodies. And right next to those shell casings, an empty Glock .40 case in one of Jennifer's closets. That's right. The gun had always belonged to David. Even worse, just one day before the murders, a witness had come forward stating that David had asked about buying a silencer for his gun. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. This wasn't self-defense. This was premeditated murder. And the final nail in the coffin? Gunshot residue, GSR, testing. While David was in the interrogation room, forensic experts had swabbed his hands. And despite the hours that had passed since the crime, despite whatever efforts he had made to clean himself up, traces of gunpowder were still there. David Sillo had no way out. Now, think about this. If the police had only relied on his confession, David might have tried to change his story later. But with the murder weapon, the matching bullets, the gun residue, and the 911 call where Jennifer said his name, there was nothing left to argue. The case was locked tight. But there was still one question lingering in everyone's mind. Why? Why would David throw his entire life away like this? Why would he kill the mother of his children? The answer? Obsession. Jealousy. Control. Jennifer had moved on. She was rebuilding her life with Bo. And David couldn't stand it. He had cheated on Jennifer countless times. He had taken her for granted. But the moment she found happiness without him, he snapped. And his reaction after the murders? It was chilling. Just 2 hours after killing Jennifer and Bo in cold blood, David didn't go into hiding. He didn't break down in regret. Instead, he went and had sex with another woman. Let that sink in. This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a moment of blind rage. It was pure selfishness, pure cruelty. But was that enough for a conviction? Would the jury see him for what he really was? We'll find out in the next part, as David Sillo faces the trial that will determine his fate. But first, what do you think? If Jennifer hadn't recorded that 911 call, would David have gotten away with it? Do you think his confession was genuine, or just an act of desperation? Let me know what you think. Stay with me, because this case is far from over. The courtroom was silent as the judge entered. The case of David Sillo vs. the state of Texas was about to begin. On one side of the room sat Jennifer Cruz's family, their faces pale with grief. Her mother clutched a photo of her daughter, her fingers trembling. Behind her, Bo Martinez's family sat in somber silence, waiting for justice. And on the other side, David Sillo. Dressed in an orange jumpsuit, shackled, his once cocky demeanor had faded. He wasn't in control anymore. He wasn't in the interrogation room, spinning lies. This time, He was at the mercy of the jury. And they weren't here to play games. The prosecution's case, a murder of jealousy. The prosecutor wasted no time. From the moment the trial began, she painted a chilling picture of obsession, jealousy, and cold-blooded execution. Her voice was firm, unwavering. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Jennifer Cruz was a mother. She was a daughter. She was a friend. And on April 18, 2015, she was murdered in her own home, by the man who was supposed to love and protect her. She laid out every piece of evidence. The 911 call, Jennifer's final desperate plea, screaming David's name. The murder weapon, recovered exactly where David said it would be. The gunshot residue on David's hands. The witness testimony, proving he had tried to buy a silencer one day before the crime. Then, she turned to face the jury, her voice laced with anger. This was not a crime of passion. This was not self-defense. This was a planned execution. David Silo didn't just kill Jennifer. He made sure she suffered. He made sure Bo Martinez suffered. And when it was over, he walked away like nothing happened. David never looked up. He knew what was coming. The defense's desperate attempt. David's lawyer tried to fight back. He painted David as a broken man, a father who lost control. My client deeply regrets what happened. This was a tragic mistake. He only went to Jennifer's house that night to talk. He never intended for things to escalate. The jury wasn't buying it. Because intent matters. He brought a loaded gun. He disabled the alarm. He broke into the house. He fired multiple shots into two unarmed people. That's not an accident. That's murder. The verdict, justice is served. The trial lasted several days. Testimonies were given. The evidence was reviewed. And then, the jury left to deliberate. 1 hour passed. Then 2. And then, they returned. The judge asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman stood. "Yes, Your Honor." The room held its breath. "We, the jury, find the defendant, David Silo, guilty." A wave of relief swept over Jennifer and Bo's families. Some cried. Others nodded, knowing justice had been served. David? He sat motionless, staring at the floor. His fate was sealed. The judge wasted no time. "David Silo, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. No chance of freedom. No second chances." Jennifer and Bo were gone. But at least now, David would never hurt anyone again. But what about the children? As the courtroom emptied, one question remained. Jennifer and David's children had lost both their parents that night. Would they ever recover? Would they ever find peace? In the next part, we'll talk about the lasting scars of this crime, and how the ones who suffered the most weren't even in that house that night. But for now, what do you think? Was life in prison the right punishment for David? Or did he deserve even worse? Let me know your thoughts. Stay with me, because this story isn't over yet. The trial was over. The verdict had been read. David Silo was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Justice had been served, at least on paper. But the real punishment wasn't just for David. The people who truly suffered. Jennifer's children. A life without their mother. Jennifer's 2 kids were still young, too young to fully understand the depth of what had happened. They woke up one day with a mother who loved them, who cared for them, who tucked them in at night. And in a blink of an eye, she was gone forever. The worst part? The person responsible wasn't some stranger. It wasn't a random act of violence. It was their own father. How do you explain that to a child? How do you tell them that their dad, the man who should have protected them, took their mother away? Jennifer's mother, now their legal guardian, described the heartbreak of seeing them struggle. They don't laugh the way they used to. Even on their happiest days, you can see the sadness in their eyes. Because no matter how much love they receive, no matter how much time passes, they will always live with the scars of that night. The true cost of jealousy and possession. So why did this happen? Why would a man do this to the mother of his children? Because he couldn't let go. Jennifer had moved on. She was rebuilding her life. She had found love again. And David? He couldn't accept that he wasn't in control anymore. This wasn't about love. It was about power, jealousy, and possession. David treated Jennifer like she belonged to him, like she had no right to be happy without him. And when he realized he had lost her forever, he made the ultimate, selfish decision. And now? He lost everything. But the difference is, he made that choice. Jennifer and Bo never had a choice. Lessons we can learn from this tragedy. This case is tragic, but it's also a wake-up call. How many people are trapped in dangerous relationships without even realizing it? If someone constantly tries to control you, isolates you, or threatens you, that's not love. If an ex refuses to accept that the relationship is over, making you feel unsafe, take it seriously. If you know someone in a situation like this, don't ignore it. Help them before it's too late. Jennifer should have had a future. Her kids should still have their mother. But one man's obsession stole all of that away. And the saddest part? This isn't the first time this has happened, and it won't be the last. What do you think? Let's talk about it. Have you or someone you know ever dealt with a toxic, controlling relationship? What warning signs stood out to you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you found this story important, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life cases like this. Because these stories, they need to be told. And together, we can help prevent more tragedies like this one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.